621. Anas tensed from head to toe as he stared into those lifeless eyes. They were hollow, devoid of anything that would make anyone human, and staring into them, Anas felt as though he was staring directly at a doll. A lifeless doll without an ounce of thought. But that feeling quickly faded as the merchant's eyes flickered back to life. He looked at Anas as though nothing had happened. "Ah, you're here." His calm smile almost felt creepy. "Yes," Anas nervously answered. For some reason, facing the merchant in front of him, he felt cold sweat trickling down his back. Something about the image from before remained stuck in his mind, leaving his throat dry. A thought occurred to him then. He couldn't possibly be a hallowed, right? His stomach flipped at the thought. However, he quickly shook his head. No, if he was, the captain would have easily have detected it. Anas took a quiet breath, trying his best to calm his mind. The mirror dimension was an extremely cruel space with danger lurking everywhere. Hallowed were humans that had been possessed by the voices. They were humans in every sense of the word, but at the same time, weren't. They were merely walking bodies that were ensnared by the voices. They were dangerous entities that preyed upon people, using them as a means to fuel their growth. The merchant before him exhibited similar symptoms to a hallowed. But was he one? Anas couldn't tell. Every hint or clue suggested to the case, but at the same time, Anas felt that it wasn't the case. Taking into consideration the goods that he had managed to bring, he wasn't lying when he said he came from afar. But where exactly did he come from, and what was his goal? "We can start closing shop now." Closing. Anas snapped out his thoughts, his eyes blinking rapidly as he looked outside the shop, where a long line was still present. They were all trying to peer into the shop, probably curious about the situation inside now that Silas had left. "What? Why?" "Because we're all sold out." "What?" Anas' eyes widened. "Sold? When?" "Oh, wait." It was then that Anas was reminded of who had just entered, and his expression tightened. Could it be? "No, don't worry. The goods have been sold. The kind man who came before bought everything in the store." That. Anas' lips trembled. Kind man. Silas was anything but kind. Simply put, he was the type of person who took whatever he wanted. The fact that the shop was still intact was a surprise in itself. Then again, he was currently within the jurisdiction of the temple. Even he had to be cautious with them. If he really did something like that, he'd be permanently kicked out of the city and all areas under the goddess of light. Still, Anas felt the need to share the situation with the merchant. "I'm sure you've already guessed who that was. You've got your glasses on, after all. Long story short, he's not paying. He was likely here to size you up, or for something else entirely." "I know," the merchant answered with his usual calm smile. He didn't seem to be at all bothered by the situation, prompting Anas to frown. He really couldn't understand this man. "Then why?" The merchant laughed, sitting down on his chair and taking out a book before flipping to a certain page. As he did, he adjusted his glasses. "I like it when people take money from me." "Ah, like it when people take money." What sort of logic was this? But then, as if suddenly recalling something, Anas grew stiff as he saw the merchant's lips pulled higher. "You know it best, don't you?" Anas swallowed, his throat tightening. "I get along really well with those that take money from me." Hearing the words, Anas felt his lips tremble. He finally understood what the merchant was hinting at, and his entire expression crumbled. He's a complete lunatic. How could he even? No, this was a recipe for disaster. Silas wasn't just anyone. He was a bona fide Tier 8 captain with years of experience. He wasn't someone that just anyone could talk to. And yet, he was planning on working with someone like that. Lunatic. He was a total lunatic. The worst part of all of this was the fact that Anas had been somewhat aware of the merchant's plan all along. It was just that, he only expected him to use his fame to get the captain to help him get to the remnant south. However, it seemed like he had grossly underestimated the merchant's greed. Anas wanted to say something, but eventually held himself back. He understood that whatever he said would go on deaf ears. As such, he could only let out a breath and shake his head. It was also in that moment that he caught a glimpse of the book in the merchant's hand. Zayrul, the one who rests beneath. His brows furrowed at the sight. Zayrul was a rather famous figure in the region. In fact, it was rather famous all over the mirror dimension. After all, it was one of the few existing primordial within the entire mirror dimension. Ruler of the Crimson Sea, anyone who came into contact with Zayrul was never able to recall its appearance. It was almost as if all information about it had been completely erased from their minds. Its size, its appearance, its nest, it was all a mystery. However, the only thing that wasn't a mystery was its strength. As an ancient beast, it stood at the pinnacle of the mirror dimension. Just a casual movement from it could wipe out the entire city of Virith Anish. Zayrul was also one of the main reasons why the Seven Lords were able to dominate the Crimson Sea. After all, the water they floated on was the only part where Zayrul didn't show up. Only by going through that path could one make it to the remnant south. Anaz raised his brow while looking at the merchant. Could this be the reason why he was looking at the book? Dong, quote exclamation mark question mark quote. A loud toll suddenly echoed in the air, and Anaz' head flicked in the direction of the toll. His expression changed dramatically when he saw it came directly from the temple, and as he turned to look at the merchant, he hastily excused himself. I'm leaving. He didn't wait for the merchant to speak. He just turned on his heel, slipped out of the store, and hurriedly changed into his team leader's garb, pulling on the gray robes and settling the mask over his face. Of course, he made sure to change in a secluded area where no one was around. There were very few times when the bell rang. However, in the time that the bell did ring, it meant that something big was about to happen, and as such, Anaz made sure to change as fast as possible. By the time he arrived at the temple, he could see that the place was packed. There were all sorts of emissaries, collectors, as well as team leaders. He could see them looking at the temple's bell with grim expressions. What in the world happened? Quote. Why did the bell ring? Did something happen within the temple? Did someone die? Could it be one of the Seven Lords finally overstepped their boundaries? All manner of talk and murmur filled the air as they stepped into the temple, its vast halls of dark stone and marble echoing with voices, while a faint red glow from the towering mosaic windows above washed over the gathered crowd. The noise continued for the next several minutes until a certain step echoed throughout the temple. It was just a step, and yet, it seemed to echo above all the chatter and noise within the temple. All sound fell away as every eye turned to the figure emerging from the temple's inner sanctum, their pristine white robes and gleaming golden masks stark against the sea of followers. Anaz felt his breath quicken at the sight of the central figure, his blood pumping as he silently grabbed his chest. That was Illuminarch. Welcome, everyone. A gentle voice quietly transmitted into the mind of everyone present. It was calm and brought a certain sense of peace amidst the panic that had previously spread across the entire room. Quote. I understand that everyone present is currently worried about the situation. However, the situation is still manageable as of now. We just gathered all of you here in advance to prevent the situation from turning into the worst-case scenario. The Luminarch looked around, his eyes scanning the entire room. Eventually, speaking again, his voice grew a little somber. We have detected a potential red tide. Quote. Question mark exclamation mark quote. The faces of many changed, including Anaz. He was well aware of what the red tide was. It was one of the worst possible things that could happen to the city. From the sudden rise of the waves that would reach dozens of meters, to the monsters that would come along with it. It was a massive disaster that almost threatened to shake the very foundations of the city with each time it came, which was usually every 100 years. Wait, Anaz frowned, his mind sorting through all of the information in his mind. Eventually, he felt the breath leave his body as he suddenly recalled that the previous tide had occurred just 20 years ago. For there to be another one so soon. Indeed, this red tide isn't a naturally made one. This is a premeditated event that we're currently trying to investigate. The Luminarch's words brought the entire room to a freeze. Premeditated event. Taking into consideration the danger of the event, alongside the grand scale of it, everyone in the room struggled to understand how such an event could be artificially created. At least, most people struggled to understand. Anaz on the other hand was knowledgeable enough to gain a certain idea, and his expression changed drastically. Zayrul. The Luminarch's gaze swept the entire place, his presence radiating a terrifying gloom. Quote. Someone is trying to provoke the primordial one, Zayrul. Anaz's entire body shook at the words, his mind joggling back to the scene from before. To the time when he was in the shop and he caught a glimpse of the merchant's book. Ho, surely. A fluttering sound echoed within the confines of the empty store as an owl materialized from out of nowhere, nestling itself on top of the wooden counter. Sensing the owl, Lazarus placed the book in his hands onto the counter and smiled. Did you notice anything strange? Quote. Yes. Owl Mighty frowned a little as it replied. It was still having trouble getting accustomed to Julian's sudden change. From the way he carried himself and spoke, he was slowly starting to feel like a completely different person. But Almighty understood the reason for Julian's actions. If this was to help himself grow and become stronger, then Almighty was prepared to help and support Julian. Just like he had done for it. I've noticed a sudden shift in the tides. The sea level has risen, and is showing signs of rising more. The nearby monsters have also started to grow restless. Something big is coming. Lazarus covered his mouth and started to ponder. He had read a lot of books over the past several months, and as such, he was quite knowledgeable in a lot of the things that were happening. Hearing the details from the owl, a possibility crossed Lazarus's mind. Red tide. Only such an event seemed to fit all the descriptions detailed by Almighty. And if that were the case, then the situation appeared a lot more serious than expected. Not only was the red tide incredibly dangerous, but it was also not supposed to happen for several dozen more years. Something was clearly off about the situation. But what exactly could the reason be? Deep in thought, Lazarus was about to reach for another book that might have information about the situation when the door to the store suddenly opened. Almighty's figure faded from the spot. Clank. Anaz entered the store in a rush, his expression twisted. You. He raised his hand and pointed it at Lazarus. You did this, didn't you? You're the one who is creating all of this mess. I saw it. I saw it all. Oh. Rather than being shocked or surprised by Anaz's sudden actions, Lazarus remained calm. He just casually leaned back on his chair while looking at his assistant. Before he could get any word out, Anaz shifted his attention towards the book he was previously reading. That right there. He pointed at the book. Quote. Do you think I wouldn't remember that? This book. Lazarus shifted his attention towards the book on the counter. Zerul, the one who rests beneath. A look of realization soon crossed his features. Ah, that. Anaz's body grew tense. The mana in his body circulated quickly as he prepared to attack at any given second. He couldn't allow anyone to do any harm to the land of the goddess. He was prepared to use his body to end things quickly. However, instead of the reaction he expected to receive from the merchant, all he was met with was a subtle laugh. Ha! This made Anaz frown. Why are you laughing? Instead of answering immediately, Lazarus covered his mouth before shaking his head. There were subtle hints of disappointment in his voice as he spoke. I had previously chosen you because you were smart, but I'm starting to think that I made the wrong decision. What? Did you seriously come here accusing me of masterminding some massive secret plot involving the Great Primordial One, just to damage the city and the temple? Anaz licked his lips, his mouth dry. No, you could have other motives. Such as, Lazarus raised his hand to stop Anaz from speaking. Alright, let's say you're right, and I'm the mastermind behind all of this. What exactly do you think you're going to achieve by marching all the way over here just to tell me you've figured it out? Didn't it ever occur to you to lie low, quietly spy on me, and actually find out what I was planning? Or, I don't know, maybe bring backup instead of showing up here all by yourself? The more Lazarus spoke, the more Anaz felt himself grow breathless. Everything that he was saying was correct. They were all the things that he should have done and yet failed to do. Instead, he had so naively run back to the merchant and spilled everything. Anaz felt his heart sink. This was his one true weakness and the reason why his chances of becoming a Luminarch were low. It was because of his impulsiveness and blind devotion to the goddess of light. To him, she was his everything. His saving grace in his worst moments in life. She was the one who accepted him despite the dirty blood flowing inside his body. She meant everything to him. And that was why whenever something that threatened the goddess and her power occurred, he'd lose all rationality. You're lucky. The merchant quietly stood up, walking towards Anaz and standing right before him. It was only now that the two stood in front of each other that Anaz noticed the disparity in their heights. The merchant, he was almost a head taller than him, while he was scrawny in comparison. But this wasn't something that he could control. His lack of nutrition and diet had resulted in his stunted growth. And even then, he was faring much better than the vast majority of the people in this city. Quote. Had it been anyone else and you would have probably have had your head flying. Thankfully, I'm quite the forgiving person. I'll give you one more chance. Lazarus placed his hand over Anaz's shoulder, his eyes narrowing into slits as Anaz felt a certain coldness run through his body. It was almost as though his entire body had been plunged into the depths of the cold ocean. Thankfully, the sensation didn't last for very long as Lazarus removed his hand shortly after. And it was only then that Anas felt his breath return, cold sweat trickling down his back as he took deep and heavy breaths. Ha! Ha! Without glancing at him, the merchant walked towards the windows of the store and looked towards the streets. A red tide will be coming soon, and given the information that you've told me, it seems that some sort of organization, or person, is trying to stir up trouble with the great primordial one in order to cause trouble to this land. Lazarus caressed his chin, his eyes hazy as he was lost in thought. On the other hand, Anas slowly started to recover his breath, staring at the merchant's back with a complicated expression. In that moment, he had almost felt death's touch. He had really been close to dying. And that made the merchant before him even more enigmatical in his eyes. By now, if it wasn't already clear before, it was quite clear to him that he was no regular merchant. He was definitely hiding something. But Anas felt it was impossible for him to figure out. Right now, he could only quietly submit while trying to learn more about the situation. His only loyalty lay with the goddess. Nobody else could take it. To provoke the great primordial one. These people sure are very ambitious. Lazarus cracked a smile at the thought. As far as he had read, Zerul was a creature that even the 7 lords of the seas avoided at all costs. It was probably a figure that the woman from the academy would struggle to fight against. Monsters always tended to be a little stronger than humans when they were of the same rank. The same was true for a monarch against a primordial one. This is a very interesting situation. Lazarus turned his attention back towards his assistant, who had slowly started to recover. Are you feeling better? A little. That's good then. Lazarus reached for the door of the store and slowly opened it, allowing the dry air of the city to filter into the store. Since the appearance of the red tide will be quite troublesome for me and what I have planned, how about we go and check the situation out? Check the situation out. Anas blinked his eyes, at a complete loss. It took him a few seconds to finally realize what Lazarus was trying to say, and his eyes widened. Wait, you're saying we should investigate the ones responsible for this? Yes, why not? But that's the temple's duty. There's a chance it might interfere with their work, and we might get mistaken for. I don't want to hear it. Lazarus raised his hand and stopped Anas from speaking. Looking around, he took a step forward and headed down the street. Anas could only stare at his back for a short moment before clenching his teeth and following from behind. Investigating the situation might be very dangerous. We might lose our lives. Don't you think that a decision like this should be made with more caution? It's also wise to work with the temple. If it's them. Lazarus stopped, his gaze falling on Anas, who suddenly stopped talking. The silence carried until the merchant smiled. Hoo. Anas bit his lips, and lowered his head in resignation. He could see that anything else he said regarding the situation would only arouse his anger. The only thing he could do was walk behind him in silence. That was until he recalled something. About the book from before. The one about the great primordial one, Zerul. Yes. Anas nodded. Why were you reading that? Anas was really curious. The timing felt a little odd to him. What were the chances that such a coincidence would occur? About that, it's really nothing noteworthy. I was just curious about its abilities and its bone. What sort of abilities would it give me if I took it? Anas suddenly stopped, his gaze fixed on the walking merchant as he covered his mouth, his heart pressed tightly against his throat. It couldn't be, right? As if sensing his sudden shift, Lazarus turned back and looked at Anas before cracking a smile. Why do you look like someone who has seen a ghost? I was just joking. I know my limit. There's no way I can get a primordial ranked bone. Shaking his head while mumbling things like, I'd rather sell it if I have it. I bet it would give me enough to buy a city, haha. Listening to him, it really did seem like he was joking. And yet, Anas felt something sink deep into his stomach. For whatever reason, he really struggled to believe him. 623. The crimson sea stirred, its surface rippling as if breathing. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the water crept higher along the sea barrier made out of dark stone, the ships docked by the port swaying faintly in the water. Bells jingled through the bazaar as an unusual, faint breeze drifted across the city. The atmosphere within the city was somber. The shops started to close, and the people started to disperse. News of the red tide had already started to make way across each of the citizens, making them drop everything as they all rushed away from the city. They could only pray to the goddess, hoping she'd protect them from this upcoming tragedy. If you haven't moved out yet, I suggest you do so now. We cannot protect you from the upcoming tide. A red tide is coming. Those from the temple moved across the city, spreading word everywhere. They were merely warning the citizens. Whether they moved out or not wasn't something they cared very much about. They were only trying to get them out of the way so that they wouldn't be a hindrance later down the line when the tide arrived and the fight began. Hey, the red tide is coming. You should leave. One of the temple members spun around, shouting at a pair of figures strolling along the edge of the port, where red waves splashed against their shoes. His cries earned only a few fleeting glances before the strangers moved on, ignoring him entirely. Don't tell me I didn't warn you. The emissary turned around, focusing his attention elsewhere. In the meantime, Anas turned towards Lazarus. What do you plan on achieving by walking here? I understand that you want to investigate the matter, but walking by the port won't get us anywhere. Anas glanced around as they walked along the port, the black stone slick with red where the water sluggishly receded back into the sea. In the distance, ships bobbed and rocked, swaying uneasily in the restless harbor. A pungent smell of iron mixed with salt lingered in the air as the two walked. What if we work with? What are their motives? What? Lazarus suddenly cut Anas off, his eyes fixed towards the sea in the distance. His expression appeared relatively calm, but he was in fact deep in thought. In order to figure out the ones responsible for all of this, he needed to have an idea of what their goals and motives were in trying to stir trouble with the great primordial one. Could it be some sort of plot against the goddess of light? This seemed to be the most probable scenario. Virath Anish was a major city under the goddess's jurisdiction, also known as the Land of Light, which covered the entire remnant south and the land on the outskirts of the Crimson Sea. From what he had managed to read, the world within the mirror dimension was complex and layered. Power was largely held by the gods, with the notable exceptions of Oricleus and Mortem. Each god ruled over their own jurisdiction, complete with distinct laws, religions, economies, languages, and systems of governance. It wasn't uncommon for there to be conflicts between the lands. Could this be a plot by one of the other lands? Other lands. Anas frowned, thinking for a moment before understanding the implication behind the merchant's words. He wanted to refute his words at first, but found himself unable to. It's possible. The relationship between the other lands wasn't exactly harmonious. There had been many instances in the past when one land interfered with another's, resulting in great damage to occur. At first, everyone was worried that the gods might interfere in such matters, but that never occurred. The gods simply did not care for what happened between them. In fact, it was almost as though they encouraged such actions. It's possible. Then why do you think they'd be doing it? Anas shook his head. I'm not sure. It could be revenge. It could be an attempt to slow the growth of the Land of Light, or to cripple us entirely. Maybe it's something else altogether. It's hard to say. I see. Lazarus remained calm even after hearing Anas' words. He fell deeper into thought, and just as they neared the harbor, he stopped, his gaze falling over one of the street lights by the port. It was there that he saw it. A missing poster. Missing. If you have any information, please contact the temple immediately. A suitable reward will be offered to anyone who can locate this man or provide information leading to his whereabouts. On it was a small description and an image. Lazarus's eyes flickered as he stared at the poster. He slowly reached out for it and ripped it from the post. A missing poster. Anas, on the other hand, didn't think much of it. In the city, he had seen many such powers. This is honestly quite common. You shouldn't think too much when you see this. There are a lot of people who go missing. Either from falling into the sea, or by messing with those pirates. Nobody really pays much attention to them. Anas thought the merchant would leave things there, but contrary to his belief, he pocketed the missing sign and walked over to another where another sign appeared. This time, there was an image of a young woman. A woman. Anas grew a little curious as he looked at the paper. Even then, it was merely a curious look. He didn't understand why the merchant was spending time looking at the missing papers. However, he didn't say much else and just followed along, watching as he picked up sign after sign. He doesn't seem like someone who would do things randomly. I should just watch in silence and see what he's planning. Anas had observed enough to understand that this was the best course of action instead of just questioning everything that he did. And even if he did ask, the merchant wouldn't respond, so staying silent was the way to go. That was what he did for the next few hours. Before they knew it, the two of them were holding on to quite a few missing signs, only coming to a stop on a certain wooden bench where they dropped the papers. This is quite a lot. Anas looked through the list, his expression growing a little grim. It was only now that he was seeing the number of missing signs that he realized just how many people went missing in the city. Was their security really that bad? He was just about to say something when the merchant pointed towards a certain paper. This guy. Anas looked where Lazarus pointed. His next words made his brows shoot up. Quote. He came to the store yesterday. It says right here that he went missing 2 days ago. Anas looked at the paper in shock. He had also been present during the shop's run, and he had seen many faces in the process. Staring at the picture, he indeed felt that he had seen it before. Could he have been found? Maybe. Lazarus skipped to another page before pointing it out as well. Does this face look familiar? This. It did. What about this one? Yes. Quote. And this one? Ah. Anas slowly raised his head as he looked at the merchant. His jaw grew a little slack as he started to realize that hardly anyone within the picture was missing. In fact, most of the people depicted were all found. What could this mean? Lazarus sat down on the bench, his hand massaging his chin as he fell into thought. Either the temple is incredibly efficient, or something else is occurring. For them to return almost on the same day or after being reported missing, it's too much of a coincidence. The merchant slowly turned his head towards Anas. Did the temple not notice anything strange? Surely they must have. No. Anas wanted to say yes, but he knew that answer. Quote. They didn't notice a single thing. In fact, I don't even think that the temple knows that some of the people here are not missing at all. Oh, but that's because of the sheer number of people that go missing every day. That's why they didn't notice a thing just yet. But I'm sure they will if you give them more time. In fact, I should probably report this to them right now. Stay. Lazarus stopped Anas before he could run off to the temple. Reporting this to the temple might have undesired effects. Anas swallowed, understanding the subtle meaning behind the merchant's words. He held his breath as Lazarus flicked his finger over the missing pages. For the temple to have missed this, there are only 2 possibilities. 1. They're incompetent. Or 2. Lazarus stopped there, but the meaning got across Anas, who closed his eyes. Single quote. Or the temple itself could have been compromised. Anas' expression darkened as he considered the situation. If that was indeed the case, caution was no longer optional. He knew, without a doubt, that whoever was behind this was anything but ordinary. Hearing the merchant make a surprised sound, Anas opened his eyes to see the merchant looking towards a certain direction. He slowly turned his head to see where he was looking, and he paused. But only for a brief moment as he flicked his head back towards the bench and picked up one of the posters. This. He alternated his gaze between the poster and the person in the distance. His long hair fluttered under the faint breeze as he stood by the edge of the port, his gaze directed towards the crimson sea in the distance. After checking for the 3rd time, Anas was sure. Without a doubt, the person standing by the port was none other than one of the missing people. He was just about to move in his direction when he was stopped by a certain hand. What? Anas was just about to protest when he suddenly saw the figure turn its head toward him, the movement unnervingly slow. As it did, its eyes locked with their eyes. They were completely white, devoid of any emotion or life. Anas felt his breath freeze, his chest tightening, as if the very air had been sucked from his lungs. And just when he thought things couldn't get any creepier, the figure moved forward, its body folding into a limp, lifeless fall as it threw itself into the sea below. They were soon swallowed by the red beneath. Splash. 624. What the hell? Anas was just about to rush to the edge of the port dock when Lazarus stopped him, his expression still calm. Quote. Don't be hasty. Anas opened his mouth, but soon stopped himself. The merchant was right. There was no need for him to be so hasty. The situation was extremely abnormal, and rushing would only do more harm than good. I understand. Anas sat down on the bench, his gaze still lingering over the spot where the figure was previously standing. Splash. The waves splashed against the edge of the sea wall, the water splashing all over with a deafening roar. Anas could only wait in silence while Lazarus kept his gaze fixed on the spot where the figure jumped. Anas was curious to understand what he was trying to do, but he decided to remain silent while Lazarus lowered his head slightly. His eyes flickered as he saw the faint outline of a figure stirring just below the water, waiting for something. Lazarus's lips slowly pulled upwards at the sight. So he's waiting. It was unfortunate that he could see right through him with his skillmana sense. Had the 2 of them jumped for him after, they would have most likely have fallen into its trap. Lazarus kept his gaze fixed on the silhouette beneath the water, waiting. waiting for it to slowly pull away. And sure enough, after 20 minutes, his eyes finally saw movements coming from the figure as it dove deep into the water, sinking into its depths. Okay, we can start moving now. Lazarus stood up from his seat, startling Anaz, who had been waiting the entire time. Where are we going? Where? Lazarus laughed, his eyes fixing onto the distant water. Into the water, of course. Ha! Ignoring the stunned expression on Anaz's face, Lazarus moved to the edge of the seawall and looked down. The water was just a few meters below, and the waves were starting to rage on. Water splashed across his face, the metallic scent lingering in his nose as he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then, splash, he dove down into the water. Wait, Anaz's voice echoed loudly behind him, but by then it was already too late as he was soon swallowed up by the water, its cold body embracing him from all directions. Falling into the crimson waters, his body lay weightless and suspended. Almost as if he were back in his mother's womb, but instead of warmth, all he felt was coldness. Lazarus opened his eyes, and what he saw was nothing short of unnerving. An endless sea of red surrounded him, the color suffocating, pressing in from every direction. The deeper he looked, the darker it became, as if the ocean itself was really made of blood. The world around him was still, the silence adding to the sense of suffocation. But the silence was soon shattered by a splashing sound as Lazarus turned his head to see Anaz appear beside him. His eyes were closed, and his finger pinched his nose. Staring at the sight, Lazarus smiled. Even though he always seems to disagree with me or wants to get the temple involved, he still follows me. Lazarus was happy. In the end, his eyes didn't deceive him. He had truly found himself the perfect assistant. If not for his strange obsession with the goddess, he would have been perfect. Lazarus waited for Anaz to open his eyes before pointing down. His gesture was simple, and Anaz instantly understood what he was trying to say. We're going down. Anaz shook his head, but Lazarus ignored him and circled his arms around the water, pushing himself down. Either way, he was still going to follow. And sure enough, Anaz followed. Diving down, Lazarus's eyes were still focused on the faint silhouette in the distance as it moved deeper and deeper into the depths of the Crimson Sea. I hope this won't last for long. I don't know how long I'll be able to hold my breath. There were still some concerns as Lazarus dove deep into the water. His main concern stemmed from his inability to breathe. Had he been a body user, he would have been able to hold his breath for much longer, but as a mind and elemental mage, his body wasn't very strong. But in spite of this, his body was still much stronger than a regular human. If he had to make an estimate, he could probably hold his breath for about 10 to 20 minutes. Taking into account the time that it would take for me to go back up, I'll need to give myself enough time to make it back up before running out of oxygen. Lazarus quickly calculated his current situation before diving deeper into the depths of the sea, the darkness around him turning even more pronounced as the cold clung to his skin from all sides, almost as though 1,000 cold skinny fingers were brushing against his body. The deeper he went, the greater the pressure became, and his chest started to feel tighter, as though the very water was trying to crush the air from his lungs. From time to time, he'd turn around to check on Anaz to see how he was faring. For now, he still appeared to be okay. In fact, he appeared to be doing better than he was. Lazarus nodded, diving deeper into the depths of the ocean, the silence around him starting to feel more and more suffocating. He continued to follow the silhouette, his gaze never leaving it. But just as he moved deeper, his head flicked ahead. He suddenly felt some strange, and when he looked ahead, his eyes narrowed. He activated Mana Sense again, trying to gauge for anything, but nothing. Silence. The world around him was silent. He gazed back down to see the silhouette growing further, and he proceeded to move down again. However, just as he moved down, his senses screamed as a massive shadow loomed, filling his entire field of vision. Quote. Exclamation mark quote. His eyes shook as he saw the massive shadow, towering over everything his eyes could cover, as a single pale light suddenly appeared. It was only when the pale light appeared that Lazarus felt the creature's presence, its silhouette stretching across his entire vision, appearing as large as the temple of the goddess of light. Lazarus held his breath, and he looked at Anaz, who stared at the creature in horror, his entire body shaking. The shadow moved closer, revealing what had only been a vague outline before. Dark skin, with several sharp bones protruding outward, its unfocused white eyes seemed to fade in and out, adding to its terrifying presence. The pale light flickered again, and for a split second, he saw the creature's maw. The teeth were enormous, sharp, and thin. Each one was at least 5 times his size, gleaming like a trap waiting to snap shut. In seconds, the jaw was already upon him. Lazarus didn't think much. He reached out to grab Anaz and took a step forward, activating Step of Suppression. Swoosh! His figure dropped rapidly, bubbles forming as the pressure around him heightened. He could feel Anaz struggling as he was dragged down, but he couldn't care less about how he was currently feeling. Looking up, he saw the pale light flicker again, turning towards him. The creature. It was still following him. Lazarus's entire body grew tense, the darkness swallowing him from all directions as he sank deeper and deeper into the darkness. The deeper he sank, the greater the pressure became. He could feel his chest starting to ache. The sudden increase in pressure was taking a toll on his body, but he had no choice but to do this. Just a little more, a little. Thump. He felt something touch his feet. I've reached the bottom. Lazarus didn't think much as he activated Lament of Lies, blending himself and Anaz perfectly with the darkness around. At the same time, he kept his gaze focused on the massive creature up ahead, the light flickering away, and darkness taking over. It was also in that moment that he lost complete sight of it. Even with mana sense, Lazarus held his breath as he crouched down, trying his best to hide in the rocks he was in. They felt rather smooth to the touch, but he didn't think much of it. He did his best to hide their presence as his body started to shudder under the cold. He didn't know how long had passed, but he could feel that he was slowly starting to run out of oxygen. He was about to reach the point where he'd have to go back up before it was too late. But could he really go back up? He looked at the darkness around him, his breath tense as the silence around him felt suffocating. It felt as though it was just the two of them present, but Lazarus could tell there was a third figure. It was lurking somewhere, looking for them, and sure enough, flick, a pale light appeared, just a few meters away from them, causing Lazarus's entire body to shudder as he saw the body of the gigantic figure moving past him. Anaz froze entirely next to him, his breathing seemingly stopping as the two stood in absolute silence while watching the frame move along the water. Lazarus stood cautiously, trying his absolute best to minimize their presence. He was so focused that he almost jumped up when he felt a subtle tug coming from Anaz. Lazarus frowned, his head snapping towards Anaz in an attempt to tell him to stop. However, it was the moment that he turned around that he saw the shocked expression on his face. Lazarus tilted his head, and just as he was starting to wonder what was going on with him, he saw Anaz point down. Down. Lazarus followed Anaz's actions, and soon, his expression changed. Because it was dark before, he couldn't see it properly, but with the faint light coming from the gigantic monster, he finally noticed his surroundings. The rocks, he took a closer look at them. They were smooth, round, and well-defined as they stretched up around him. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He counted 5 such rocks. Lazarus looked closer, his eyes slowly opening. Fingers. Slowly, Lazarus lowered his head, his chest tightening. That was when he saw it. The massive frame of a statue that appeared to be twice the size of the strange monster, its colossal form half submerged in the seabed, as they stood atop its open palm. Single quote. H-ha. 625. The dim light reached only so far, illuminating a small patch around them. Beyond the outstretched fingers, curving inward like the bars of a cage, and the faint silhouette of the statue's form, all Lazarus could see was darkness. The darkness was suffocating, and so was the cold that surrounded them from all sides. Looking around, Lazarus could no longer spot the silhouette from before. It had faded before he knew it, and all that was left was the strange sea monster that lurked around them, its light casting a dim glow over the surroundings as it circled the area. This is rather problematic. Lazarus's gaze swept the surroundings. He was trying to gauge his situation. I'm slowly running out of oxygen. If I don't move up in the next few minutes, it'll be too late for me. But at the same time, I can't fight this monster. It wasn't as though the monster was incredibly strong. Judging from the fluctuations coming from its body, maybe it was nearly a destroyer rank, but still not there yet. This meant that it was still a terror rank. Lazarus was confident in dealing with such a creature, but that was on land. His skills were limited in the water. The time it took for him to chant a spell was longer, and the effectiveness of his spells was also lower. There was a reason why Anaz said that the pirates had dominance over the seas, even when fighting against higher-ranked opponents. The world within the water was an entirely different world. Within this world, he was a nobody. An insignificant creature. And then, flick, the darkness returned, swallowing him up completely. Lazarus felt his chest grow heavier as the darkness swallowed him, his gaze sharper than before as he lost all sense of the creature that lurked around him. He stood next to one of the fingers, his hand feeling the smooth yet rough exterior. Did it leave? He looked around cautiously. Even with mana sense, he couldn't detect a single thing. Time continued to tick, and he felt the oxygen within his lungs depleted with the passing of the seconds. A creeping dread started to settle within his mind. However, he continued to remain calm and rational. He couldn't panic. He couldn't allow himself to panic. This was a waiting game. It was a game that was used to determine who had the most patience. But it was also a disadvantageous game. He couldn't afford to wait for long, unlike the creature which could breathe underwater. Lazarus's mind started to spiral as time continued to pass. He was starting to feel the cold biting and latching onto his skin as he continued to bide for time, his mind churning with all sorts of ideas and thoughts. But soon, time was up. I have to move. He couldn't afford to stay within the water for longer. And so, nudging Anaz next to him, he placed his hand over the tip of the finger and gently pushed himself up, his body floating into the darkness as he scanned his surroundings with extreme caution. Is it gone? Lazarus couldn't tell at all. He continued to drift up, his movements as slow as possible. He didn't want to attract any unwanted attention. He slowly and carefully started to move up the water, his chest tingling as he looked around him. Everything was proceeding smoothly, but he didn't lower his guard. The silence around him left him completely unsettled. Furthermore, he didn't know if the monster would show up or not. He circled his arms around the water once more, moving up. But just as he did, flick, a pale light appeared beneath him, forcing his entire body to stiffen as he immediately stopped. Anaz, who had been following from behind, similarly stopped. They both looked down and saw the massive form of the creature gliding beneath them. That's when they also got a clearer view of the flickering light ahead of it, attached to its body by a long, rod-like extension. A growing sense of unease settled in their bodies as they spotted the light, and just as Anaz started to grow nervous, Lazarus's gaze moved elsewhere. With the monster still beneath, lighting up the seabed, his eyes finally caught sight of another structure in the distance. He couldn't see much, the light barely reached beyond a few feet, but it was enough to feel the immense scale of the place. Seaweed clung to the walls, and intricate patterns and lines were etched into the stone, depicting something he couldn't quite make out. Lazarus looked at the strange structure for a few seconds, engraving it deeply in his mind before slowly turning around and shifting his attention up. He didn't know if he had enough oxygen within his lungs to be able to make it up. To make matters worse, he could feel the creature beneath them react to their every movement. The less they moved, the less it seemed to notice them. They had to go slowly. One smooth and slow motion at a time. That was exactly what they did as they tried to claw their way back towards the surface. The monster beneath didn't seem to notice them as they moved up, but at the same time, it almost felt as though it was aware of them. Watching them, this feeling never seemed to leave, even as they managed to get halfway up. In fact, it appeared to grow the higher up they went. Bah, thump, bah, thump. In the silence, Lazarus could feel and hear his own heartbeat. He unknowingly started to speed up his movements, trying his best to get to the surface even faster, but it was also in that moment that he felt something squirm beneath him. Oh, Lazarus's heart tightened as he spotted a black vortex beneath him, squirming as it headed rapidly in their direction, the faint dot of light within the vortex growing brighter as it approached them. His heart nearly leapt out of his throat when he saw just how fast it was moving, and it was also then that he realized that the monster was finally coming for them. Single quote ... exclamation mark question mark single quote. Anaz was the first one to move, the area around him squirming with bubbles as he shot up. His speed was fast, but nowhere near as fast as the rapidly approaching gigantic creature beneath. Looking at it and looking up, Lazarus knew that it was impossible for him as well. There was simply no way for them to outrun it. Anaz, who saw this, started to panic even more, his mind racing as he looked at Lazarus, who remained still in the water. What are you doing? Go up. Shit. His pupils dilated when he saw the massive creature rapidly approach them. Fuck. I shouldn't have come here. Why did I even bother following him? Shit. May the goddess of light protect me. While panicked, Anaz kept his eyes on the merchant, who remained still in the water. This drove Anaz crazy, especially when the monster was now a few meters beneath them, its maw open and its sharp teeth pointed. No, Anaz internally screamed as he saw the monster about to swallow up the merchant, but that only lasted for a brief moment. It was right as the monster was about to swallow Lazarus when Anas saw the merchant take a single step forward, his entire body shooting down shortly after. Thump! A muffled bang echoed in the water shortly after as the merchant landed directly onto the creature's sharp tooth. Wah! Anas was shocked to see the merchant's actions. But things were far from over. The moment the merchant settled himself on the monster's teeth, he flicked his hand, and over several dozen thin threads appeared, each one shooting from out of his arm and tightening around the monster's teeth. The entire process was extremely quick, and in a matter of seconds, the monster's teeth were covered in thin threads. By the time the creature had time to react, it was already too late as Lazarus clenched his hand, forcing its body to slowly start to shut. But things weren't over. The moment the monster noticed something amiss, its body jerked and flicked, seemingly trying to force Lazarus away, but as if one step ahead, Lazarus kicked himself up and pressed his hand against the monster's head. Anas watched as several purple runes formed around Lazarus's palm, settling themselves deep into the monster's body. Curse magic. Anas recognized the runes in an instant. From their purple color and complexity, it looked like some sort of advanced spell. The entire process lasted no more than half a second as Lazarus pulled his hand away, kicking his body away as the creature jerked and squirmed in the water, its pale light flickering in and out continuously. Lazarus stared at the creature for a few seconds before looking back up towards the water surface and moving up. Anas could only float in the water, completely stunned by what he had just witnessed. While he was already aware that the man before him was no regular merchant, the scene before him had left him utterly speechless. However, he couldn't remain speechless for long, as this wasn't the right time for that. Without the threat of the monster, making it all the way up was not very hard. They both managed to reach shortly after, as their heads popped out of the water. Splash! Ha! Ha! Anas took heavy gulps of air the moment he popped out of the water, his body turning to what felt like jelly. Even though he didn't do anything particularly taxing, he felt incredibly tired by the experience. He wanted nothing more than to go back on land. And yet, thinking about what he had managed to witness beneath the water, he understood that it wasn't the time for him to rest. We should quickly report what we've found to the temple. With their help, we might be able to. Enough with the temple. Lazarus's calm voice cut him off before he could finish his sentence as his gaze appeared to be scanning the waters beneath, and his brows were furrowed tightly. Anas blinked his eyes. What was he looking at? Take a deep breath, the merchant said, pressing his hand over Anas' shoulder. Before Anas even had the time to scream, his entire body was sucked deeply into the water. The darkness swallowed him again. But not for long. As soon as he regained his bearings, he spotted a massive body lying on the seabed, its form twitching relentlessly within the pale, dim light that surrounded them. Anas' eyes widened. That's 626. It's not dead yet, just temporarily affected by the curse. Lazarus stared at the monster in front of him with heavy caution. It was still not dead and could snap out of the curse almost immediately. It was for that reason that he dove back down. The moment he touched the seabed and found the creature through the thread that remained connected to it, he didn't waste a single second and placed his hand over its body. Several threads shot out from his hand, trying to pierce through its tough outer skin, but he was surprised to see his threads unable to dig into its body. This is a little bit troublesome. Lazarus looked at the monster and decided to apply even more curses to it, wrapping its entire body with them. He could see the creature starting to lose even more strength as he did so, and it wasn't long before it simply lay on the seabed, unmoving. Lazarus stared at the body of the creature before settling his gaze on its antenna. He moved towards it and nudged his head towards Anas. As he did, he made a slicing motion with his hand. What? You want me to cut it? Anas quickly understood Lazarus's meaning, but was left at a loss. He didn't really understand why he wanted him to cut the antenna, but he still chose to comply and moved towards it before taking out a pair of daggers and slicing down. His movement was quick, and the antenna was sliced off cleanly. The darkness embraced them. Shortly after, silence. Anas stood in silence, staring in the direction of where Lazarus had been moments prior, waiting for him to do something. And soon, flick, a pale light flickered into life. Anas' eye widened when he saw this. Holding onto the end of the antenna, Lazarus calmly raised it and illuminated their surroundings. It works. He felt proud as he looked at the lamp in his hand. Anas also looked extremely surprised as he looked at the lamp, seemingly trying to ask how he had done this. The answer was really simple. All he had to do was channel mana into the bottom part of the lamp, and the light would turn on. The mechanism was simple, and most importantly, looking around, Lazarus felt that any creature that would see the light would immediately distance itself from them. He felt that only this light would work, and any other initiation would only bring the opposite effect. He now felt a little bit safer. That is, of course, unless it's a destroyer-ranked monster that preys on this monster. Lazarus could only hope he wouldn't meet such a creature. If he really did, then the only thing he could do was hope he would survive. With the LALP casting a dim light over the surroundings, Lazarus nudged Anaz and walked forward. At the same time, he activated Lament of Lies, and the image of the monster from before started to take over the two of them. Now, we should be indistinguishable from that thing. With the light illuminating a small radius around them, Anaz and Lazarus walked forward, the darkness no longer a concern. There was still the issue of the silence, but the two quickly adjusted to it. Single quote. It should be somewhere here. Lazarus strained to remember where he'd seen the strange structure before. As he pressed on, a long, sharp silhouette outline emerged on the horizon. His brows immediately shot up at the sight as he looked at Anaz, who also looked at the distant structure with curiosity. He hurried his movements, his legs moving as though he were on the surface. This was all thanks to step of suppression that enabled him and Anaz to move without much effort under the water. It kept them grounded to the seabed, preventing them from floating up. Eventually arriving before the structure, Lazarus stopped. His eyes locked onto a massive obelisk rising out of the seafloor like a blackened fang. Strange symbols were carved deep into the stone, but most of them were hidden beneath long strands of red seaweed that clung to its surface like veins. The markings pulsed faintly under the pale glow of his lamp, but he couldn't tell if it was just the movement of the water or something else. But that wasn't what made him freeze. He lifted the lamp a little higher. The beam pushed against the murk, and far in the distance, shadows took shape. Buildings. Dozens of them. They were huge and twisted, made of dark stone that had eroded and degraded over time. Red spiky coral had grown over most of their surfaces in thick layers, wrapping around them in a way that almost made it seem like it was strangling them. Some of the structures looked like broken temples or drowned cathedrals, their towers snapped in half or bent at sharp, unnatural angles. In front of several buildings stood statues. There were too many to count. Most were missing limbs or heads. The ones that remained intact were worse. Their faces were nearly erased by centuries underwater, but the outlines that were left, they weren't calm. They were distorted, mouths open too wide, eyes hollow and deep. It looked like they had been caught mid-scream, and whatever they had seen, it had been enough to break them. Lazarus didn't move for a long time. Something about this place felt wrong, and it wasn't just the silence. Focus. I need to figure out where the guy went. He must be here somewhere. Lazarus tried his best to maintain calm as he scanned the place, his eyes glancing at the collapsed buildings and statues around. He was sure that the silhouette he had been chasing before was somewhere here. He just needed to find him. But where exactly could he start? Lazarus closed his eyes and looked around. He couldn't afford to waste time. He still had about 15 minutes of breath inside of him. He had to quickly find out the hiding spot of the strange group responsible for this entire situation and understand what they were planning. This was something that he had to do. If a red tide occurred, then he'd have no way to traverse the Red Sea and get to the remnant south, which had been his goal the entire time. This situation was not something that he could allow to occur. As such, he continued to move deeper into the city. But just as he took another step, his head flicked up rapidly as he sensed something rapidly approaching from above. His entire body tensed when he felt the presence above, but by the time he realized it was too late. Thump! A muffled noise echoed right after as two silhouettes appeared in the distance. The moment they caught sight of the figures, Lazarus and Anaz both widened their eyes as they recognized one of them immediately. Silas, the captain of the Crimson Wraiths. Besides him was an unfamiliar figure. With long brown curly hair and green eyes, she wore a deep red coat lined with gold trim, the fabric worn at the edges. A wide leather belt crossed her waist, holding a long and narrow sword. Anaz paled the moment he saw her, like the blood had been sucked clean from his veins. He didn't speak. He couldn't. His trembling fingers reached for Lazarus, but they stopped mid-motion. It was too late. By the time he tried to warn Lazarus, the two figures had already spotted them, their eyes locking onto the two of them, causing Anaz to freeze on the spot. Oh, shit, Ak. A loud gagging sound echoed within the confines of a small chamber, a figure with long hair stumbling forward as they clung to the well-polished marble floor beneath. Their fingers scraped across the cold stone, blood flowing out from the tips of their fingers. Quote. Yerk. Gagging once more, the figure raised his head to slowly reveal an extremely pale face, dark veins flowing out of their skin and webbing across their entire face. Stop. Make it stop. Jackal's breath was rough as he looked up. His head throbbed massively, and he could hardly think. All he felt was pain. An endless amount of pain that invaded every part of his brain. How is this possible? He had known from the start that the assimilation with the blood was going to hurt, but to this extent. He couldn't understand at all. It was almost as if the blood itself was rejecting him, trying its best to shoot away from his body. Why are you rejecting me? It made no sense at all. This was his blood that should have belonged to him. How could it possibly be rejecting him? Something was amiss. No, I just need to try harder. I just underestimated the amount of time it takes for the blood to assimilate. Jackal gagged once more, forcing his body up and leaning against a tall marble pillar. He took several deep breaths as his head leaned to the side, saliva dripping down from the side of his mouth. To talk. It was also in that moment that he heard a loud knock coming from the distance. Jackal's eyes flickered, and his entire demeanor shifted. His face turned rosy again, and the veins receded. Standing up as though nothing was wrong, he moved towards the door where a familiar figure appeared. Cardinal. Jackal gave a short greeting to the concerned-looking cardinal. How are you doing? Quote. I'm doing fine. There's no issue with the assimilation. It shouldn't be long before I fully absorb the blood. That's a relief. Cardinal Ambrose covered his chest upon hearing the news. He was just about to say something else when Jackal spoke. I'm going back to the room. Unless there's something important, do not contact me. Clank. The door closed shortly after, leaving the cardinal unable to utter any more words. The cardinal could only stare at the door blankly before shaking his head. What a pity. His eyes flickered faintly, his muscles starting to spasm as he quickly massaged his face shortly after. Quote. This job is really hard. 627. What are they doing here? Lazarus's eyes narrowed at the sight of the two people ahead. Lament of Lies was still active, and as such, the two people up ahead were still unaware that what they were seeing was fake. Yet, Lazarus could keenly tell that the two people in front of him were strong enough to see through the illusion if they tried hard enough. It was for that reason that he focused entirely on making the illusion as believable as possible, slowly making the head of the monster turn away from them as a sign of disinterest. I hope this works. He wanted to interact with them, but at the same time, he understood that there was a very good chance that they wouldn't be on his side. He had to tread carefully. The two people before him were too strong for him to take any risks. Thankfully, it looked like the two of them bought his illusion and slowly turned their heads away from them. It could be because the light he was holding was real, or because they had other things they were more worried about, but the two swiftly moved away shortly after. It was only then that Lazarus felt his body relax. That was closer than expected. He was already aware that Silas was strong. Even so, he wasn't scared of him. Lazarus might not be able to beat him, but he had ways to take him on and run away. The issue lay with the woman. Lazarus was wholly unaware of who she was. No, actually, I might have an idea. It didn't take a genius to figure out her identity. One of the 7 lords, Anne, Esmeralda Eyes, O'Malley. He judged this to be her when taking into account her eye color. There were only 2 female captains within the 7 lords category, it was her and Madame Jiangxi. Taking in the description for the madam who was described to have long and lustrous black hair, it was rather easy to determine the identity of the one before him. But that begged the question. Why is she here, and with the captain of the Crimson Wraiths? As far as Lazarus knew, the relationship between the 7 lords wasn't exactly the greatest. They were all at odds with each other to gain ground within the Crimson Sea. There was only so much water they could cover that wasn't within the great primordial one's range. The more water they covered, the richer they became. This was why their relationship wasn't great. It also made the situation look all the more suspicious. Could they be involved in this matter? Could they be the ones responsible for the red tide? Feeling a certain tug and seeing Anna's expression, Lazarus could see he also seemed to think that way. But Lazarus shook his head. It was still too early to tell. They could also be here just like them, trying to investigate the situation. It wouldn't be strange for others to notice the same abnormality as they did. But was this really the reason why they were here? Lazarus closed his eyes and looked away. He didn't move just yet. He activated Mana Sense and stared at their distant silhouettes. It was only once they were far away that he stopped channeling his mana into the lamp, allowing for the darkness to swallow them. At the same time, he tugged in Anah's direction, telling him to move. Anah's followed obediently as Lazarus alleviated the gravity around them, and they started to move up, slowly moving in the direction of where the two lords had gone. The silence around them felt defeating, while the darkness felt isolating. Swimming within the cold waters with no light in sight, Lazarus felt completely alone. And that was in spite of knowing that Anah was right behind him. Something about the waters felt extremely eerie. In order to distract himself from such thoughts, he maintained his focus on the two figures in the distance. Everything was proceeding smoothly, but that wasn't for long. Flick, quote, exclamation mark question mark quote. As if a light switch had been flipped, a pale red glow suddenly flickered to life, casting long, distorted shadows as the city slowly started to come to life. Lazarus immediately stopped the moment he noticed the changes, his entire body growing tense as Anah similarly stopped. The two stood in shock as the corals and seaweed began to pulse with an eerie, lifelike rhythm. Tendrils slithered outward, growing longer, thicker, and coiling like serpents around the ruined buildings. With each pulse, the grip tightened, stone groaning under the pressure. Cracks spider-webbed across the structures, and from deep within, a faint red glow began to throb. It was as if the broken and forgotten city had suddenly pulsed with life. But as if that wasn't enough, the statues lying dormant on the seabed began to stir, eyes flickering to life, bodies creaking as they started to move. Lazarus looked at the scene in surprise, the lamp in his hand flickering faintly. Then, slowly but surely, the statues turned their heads in their direction, eyes wide and mouths open, stuck in their mid-scream position. 1, 2, 3. He soon began to lose count. But by that point, it no longer mattered. Adding an extra one to a large number didn't make things worse since the situation was already really bad. Lazarus closed his eyes before opening them again. That's not good. At the same time, not far away. Two figures zoomed through the water, their movements smooth and almost effortless. In spite of the darkness that was now slowly being replaced by a faint red light, the two of them were able to see without a problem. Not only that, they were also able to breathe and talk smoothly underwater. This was the most basic of skills for two of the 7 lords of the Crimson Sea. How do you think they'll fare? I don't know, nor do I care. Anne replied, looking completely disinterested. She had one goal in coming down to the depths of the water, and that was to figure out the ones responsible for stirring the great primordial one and causing a red tide. She couldn't care less about the people above, but it was in her best interest for her to figure out the source of the problem and quickly quell it. It was for this reason that she teamed up with Silas. Quote, You're as cold as ever, but fair enough. I wanted to do something for them, but there's no point. The city will take care of them. Anne raised her brow, but didn't reply. It wasn't hard for her to see through the illusion skill used by the two people from before. Perhaps she would have struggled on land, but beneath the water, where her eyes could see through everything, the illusion was child's play. She also judged them to be investigators from the temple of the goddess of light. It wasn't within her interest to dispose of them. And even if she did want to get rid of them, the city would do that for her. Like clockwork, the city stirred to life every 12 hours. With eerie timing, seaweed, coral, and strange sea creatures would rise from the depths of the city, slithering through the ruins with one purpose: consumption. Anything in their path, from scattered stones to living flesh, was devoured without hesitation, their bodies slowly calcifying, turning everything into stone. The statues beneath were the remains of the people who weren't able to escape from the dread that lived within the submerged city that was once part of Virith Anish, but had been swallowed by a red tide thousands of years ago. Where did you say you felt the presence? Quote, coming to a stop, Anna scanned her surroundings, her gaze sweeping past the numerous broken buildings. Looking down, she saw the statues slowly turn their heads in her direction, their hollow eyes and open mouths fixed on her. Her face remained unmoved at the sight of her as she flicked her finger in the water, a long trail following shortly after as the head of the statue exploded. Silas noticed her actions and raised his brow. He soon shook his head while chuckling. And here I thought I was the hot-tempered one. Shut up. Ha ha ha. Silas let out a sharp, mirthless laugh that rang through the gloom, the sound oddly out of place in the suffocating silence. His eyes swept the ruined landscape with a strange calm until they settled on a certain landscape. Ah, there it is. Towering in the distance was a colossal pyramid, forged from black stone that seemed to drink in the light. Coral had infested its surface, growing in sharp, unnatural spires that jutted upward like the teeth of some ancient beast. Their razor tips glinted faintly, pulsing with a dull red glow, almost like a heartbeat. The corners of Silas's eyes curled at the sight of the gigantic pyramid in the distance as he nudged his head in Anne's direction. "Do you see it? I do, now." Anne pushed her body forward and moved towards the gigantic structure in the distance, her expression extremely serious. Eventually coming to a stop before the structure, she looked up, her face slightly tense. Despite her strength, the place gave her an unsettling feeling. This structure, it used to be the main temple that hosted the goddess of light. In the aftermath of the red tide that engulfed half the city, the temple was gradually forgotten, its once sacred halls left to decay in silence. Over time, it came to be known as the Temple of the Dying Light, a somber title that mirrored the severed link between the sanctuary and the goddess it once revered. "You say it's here?" "Yes," Silas replied, his gaze falling onto the entrance of the structure. Even with his eyes, he could hardly see more than a couple of meters ahead, the darkness within the temple swallowing everything that entered. "Okay," Anne nodded, taking a step forward and entering the temple. As she entered, the water around her chilled, and her expression turned even more serious. Within moments, the darkness enveloped her, swallowing every inch of her being, until there was nothing left but shadows. Silas traced her back with his eyes before eventually following from behind. As he did, he smiled ambiguously, his gaze looking back. The darkness eventually swallowed him, too. 628. The world pulsed with a tinge of red. It pulsed in a rhythmic manner, like a slow-beating heart. Bright, dim, bright, dim. Within the pulsating city, Lazarus's gaze was fixed on the numerous statues, staring in his direction. He could sense that the situation wasn't good. But he didn't run away. There was no point in running away. He could only calmly gauge the strength of the statues around him. "The majority don't seem very strong, but I can feel the presence of several powerful ones." He just couldn't tell where they were. And that made things complicated. He was worried that they might ambush them at any given moment. Should I just back up to the surface? This was an option. The only issue was that he didn't know how fast the statues were. Could they catch up to him or not? Lazarus was lost in his own thoughts, but it wasn't for long. He couldn't afford to be lost in thoughts as the situation below him grew more and more tense. He was just about to make a decision when he felt a tug coming from Anaz. Lazarus turned his head to see Anaz staring in a specific direction. Lazarus followed Anaz's line of sight, and his brow rose. Corals. Why is he staring at the corals? Did he perhaps figure something out? Lazarus's eyes glinted with keen interest. He didn't really want to abort the current situation. While he could always go back down, every second mattered. He couldn't afford to be wasting time going up and down. Lazarus's face quickly changed as he felt something behind him. He didn't even look before increasing the intensity of step of suppression. Whatever was coming at him quickly slowed down shortly after as Lazarus turned his head to see a statue moving in the water, its movement slowed, and its arms stretched towards him. Almost as though it was trying to rip his throat. But that wasn't all. Right after the first statue moved, another one came, shooting at him like a bullet. Lazarus didn't hold back. Flicking his finger, a thread shot down towards the statue, coiling around its neck. Lazarus clenched his hand as the thread closed in and severed the statue's head. That should. Lazarus's heart sank when he saw the headless statue continue to move. Thankfully, its movements had slowed down considerably. But the problem was that it wasn't dead. Could these things even be killed? The situation looked worse and worse when he looked around and saw that more and more statues were starting to move in their direction. Should I just go back up? At this rate, Lazarus's thoughts were broken by Anaz, who suddenly moved towards the decapitated statue. Wait, what is he doing? Right as Lazarus looked at him, Anaz turned around and motioned something with his hands, pointing around him. Lazarus cocked his head in confusion, but soon understood. He wants me to protect him. This realization further heightened his confusion, but he didn't think twice. He trusted Anaz's judgment, and as such, he increased the output of step of suppression to the maximum while his eyes started to slowly close. He had been holding back because he was afraid his actions might attract the attention of extremely powerful predators, but there was no point in holding back now. If Anaz figured something out, then it's worth a shot. Opening his eyes again, the world around them turned dark again. Anaz's steps paused, his gaze looking up as his expression nearly fell from shock as he saw the formation of a domain. However, quickly recalling his situation, he moved towards the headless statue. That was also when the domain closed in, swallowing everything within it as hands began to emerge in all directions. They clung to any of the statues that were within the domain, changing colors as red orbs appeared everywhere. Bang, bang, bang. The world stirred, the domain shaking as Lazarus felt the statues outside trying to peer into the domain. He tried his best to ignore those statues while taking care of the ones inside, as the hands grabbed the statues before smashing them against each other. Bang! Fragments of the statues shattered and tumbled throughout the domain as the hands repeated the process. None of the statues were able to put up much of a fight against the hands that numbered in the hundreds, but the situation was not as good as it seemed. Standing still, Lazarus could feel more and more statues cling to his outer domain. Re-up. Like cockroaches, they latched onto the domain and started to tear through the very fabric of it. Lazarus tried his best to pay them no mind, but the more they latched on, the more difficult it became for him to keep the domain standing. It's still manageable. It's still. Thump. The ground quaked all of a sudden. Lazarus's brow shot up as he looked towards the distance, a certain dread creeping up through every part of his body as he heard another loud thump. It appeared to be coming from a distance, slowly approaching his domain. His heart squeezed when he felt the pressure coming from the distant creature or monster. He couldn't quite tell, and his gaze hastily directed itself towards Anaz, who was busy studying the headless statue. He wanted to tell him to hurry up, but he was too immersed in analyzing the statue. Lazarus clenched his teeth and reinforced the domain. At the same time, he merged the red and green orbs within his mind, his eyes started to turn yellow. Power started to erupt from within his body, ready to explode at any given second. Thump. Another muffled thump. This time, it was closer than ever. Lazarus remained firm, his eyes locked towards the distance as his domain started to tear, the hands of the statues tearing through the black fabric that made it. It was also through such tears that Lazarus was finally able to see the source of all the noise outside, and his body tensed. It was another statue, one much bigger than the rest. With its eyes void, and features worn out from time, it moved mindlessly in his direction before extending its hand, massive enough to engulf his entire domain, reaching forward, trying to grab him and his domain. Lazarus braced himself, his entire body tense as the domain around him lowered, and the statues that clung onto it fell down. He slowly tensed his back, his entire body popping and squirming beneath the water as his eyes turned completely yellow. Then, swoosh. He thrust forward, his fist directed towards the approaching hand. His fist soon connected with the statue. Everything paused, but not for long, as the surrounding water rippled. Bang! A terrifying explosion quaked within the water as the statue's hand recoiled back, as the massive frame of the statue staggered. Lazarus, on the other hand, remained standing on the spot. Partially because of the hands that emerged from beneath him, holding him in place. At the same time, he hastily looked in Anaz's direction. Surely he's done. His expression changed when he saw that he wasn't where he was before, but he soon felt relieved when he saw that he wasn't too far off, his face pale. Their eyes met, and Anaz wryly smiled. I couldn't help it. So his gaze seemed to say before he shook his head, and raised his hand, displaying a large chunk of the coral. Lazarus cocked his head, confused by the sight. But soon, he watched as Anaz brought the coral to his neck. Exclamation mark question mark quote. The next scene took him by surprise as the coral quickly latched onto Anaz's neck, wrapping around it like a collar, and pulsing into life. A dim glow materialized from the coral around his neck, and seconds after, his right hand started to turn gray. No, stone, what is he? Lazarus didn't move towards Anaz. Although he was confused by his actions, he understood that he must have had a reason for them. And sure enough, not long after the coral latched onto Anaz's neck, the statues around him stopped looking at him. So that's the case. The statues were controlled by the coral, and by wearing one, he'd be able to mix with the statues. Lazarus understood everything in an instant, but as soon as he did, his head flicked up towards the distance where he saw the enormous statue heading in his direction again. Thump, thump. The water shook as it rushed in his direction, its lifeless eyes locked towards him. Lazarus quickly looked around him before flicking his hand, several threads shooting out to pick up one of the corals coming from the statue and bringing it towards him. The gigantic statue continued forward, its fist driving down towards him, the very water getting sucked into a vacuum as its fist moved towards him. Swoosh. Single quote. Exclamation mark single quote. Catching the coral, Lazarus brought it to its neck as he felt a sharp pain pierce his neck shortly after. The world came to a sudden standstill as everything stopped. Keeping his breath in check, Lazarus slowly turned his head to see the fist just a few inches from his face. He broke into a cold sweat when he saw the fist before turning to look at Anaz. He was okay, but looking at his hand, Lazarus grew worried. He already noticed the subtle graying of it. Don't tell me. He reached for the coral on his neck and tried to pull it, but found himself unable to pull it. He exerted more strength, but it refused to budge at all. Lazarus's expression turned grim at the realization, but before he could think of a way to solve the problem, he saw Anaz walk up to him and point up. Up. Lazarus frowned, but then he saw Anaz point at the coral on his neck and then up again. That was when it hit him. Is he saying that as long as we can go up on the water surface, the coral will fall off automatically? But how did he know this? Lazarus wanted to ask, but stopped himself. Judging from the rate of certification, I assume it'll take about 30 minutes for me to turn into a complete stone. That's more time than the amount of breath I have left. In that case, I'll use this time to figure out the entire situation. His gaze slowly turned towards a certain direction. His eyes flickered. Using mana sense, he could still more or less make out where the two figures were. They weren't too far from here. However, just as he was about to take a single step forward, he felt a sudden throb in his head, halting him on the spot. What the? Throb. His head throbbed again, and he pressed his hand against the coral latched onto his neck. Lazarus clenched his teeth as he realized what was happening. The true mind of the corals. It's trying to take control of my mind. A mind-type monster. His lips slowly curved upwards. Single quote ... What luck. 629. Throb. Lazarus felt his head throb. He could feel something trying to seep deeply into his mind, trying its best to control it. At first, his expression was grave, but gradually he relaxed. A mind-type monster. Had it been any other type of monster, he'd be worried. But a mind-type, that's the last thing I fear. His gaze slowly turned towards a certain direction. It was the same direction where the two lords had gone, and his eyes narrowed. He felt the main source of the control coming from there. It was hidden deep somewhere, silently controlling everything that the corals latched onto. It was sort of like a hive mind. In other words, it had one singular mind while acting in multiple bodies and entities. Throb. Lazarus's face tightened. The throbbing grew more powerful, his head feeling as though it was being smashed. Lazarus also started to understand the meaning behind Anaz's indications. It's just like he suggested. If we do go out of the water, the corals will stop having an effect. But it wasn't because the corals couldn't survive above the water. No, it was because the hive monster could only operate within a certain range. The further from the mind, the weaker the effect. The only issue would be getting out of its range. In spite of the statues not attacking them, Lazarus could still keenly feel that the mind was paying close attention to their actions and movements. If either one of them tried to defy its control and tried to run, it would activate the statues once again, making sure they wouldn't be able to get far. This was how most of its victims fell. Not only that, but it was also slowly petrifying their bodies. That made running away even harder. Lazarus lowered his head to stare at his hand, which was starting to stiffen. It wasn't just his hand, he could feel his joints also experience something similar. The moment I can't move my body is the moment that I die. This was, without a doubt, a troublesome monster. However, he wasn't totally helpless. Gradually closing his eyes, he sank into the darkness of his mind. He stood like that until he felt something within his mind, and his head throbbed again. He latched onto the pain, focusing directly on it. And then, he reached out for it. His mind blanked shortly after. By the time his mind recovered, he found himself in an entirely different place. Where is this? I looked around me. The world felt dark, but within the darkness, I could feel thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of different red dots. They were sprawled all around me, like some sort of stars, all of which seemed to be connected to something. No, more importantly, I looked down at my hands and massaged my face. Something was interfering with my mind. I couldn't focus. So much that I felt my persona suddenly fade away from my mind. At this very moment, I was me again. I tried to become Lazarus again, but the moment I tried, a certain throb pierced my mind, preventing me from doing so. That's annoying. The more I immersed myself in the character known as Lazarus, the more I felt I was closer to reaching something. I could feel that very foundations of my emotive magic starting to shake, and I knew that it wouldn't be long before I reached the key to finally upgrading my emotive magic to the 5th level. I was extremely close. I just had to immerse myself deeper into the character. This sudden immersion-breaking situation wasn't very ideal for me. The best course of action is to try to figure out how the reason for why I suddenly snapped out of my immersion and get back to it as soon as possible. Thankfully, it wasn't as though I didn't have an idea. I had a very clear idea as to why the situation had occurred as I looked around me. Towards the numerous red dots around, and the faint red lines that connected towards the very distance where a deep red orb appeared. I could see a line connecting from my neck towards the massive ball of red in the distance. The hive mind. The more I looked at the ball, the more I was convinced of this. And soon, a certain voice echoed next to me. "You're correct, human." I turned my head to see Pebble standing next to me. However, I was surprised to see Pebble in a different form than I was used to. Pebble was much bigger, its form about 5 times the size of me, as its entire body radiated with pressure as its thick gray scales shimmered under the multiple red lights in the distance. What's wrong? As if sensing my sudden shift, Pebble looked at me. I could only force a smile while shaking my head. Nothing. It's nothing. I couldn't exactly tell Pebble that I felt just slightly intimidated by its real presence. For the love of Oricleus, I couldn't. Pebble's ego would simply inflate too much. Hee hee. Chuckling, Pebble looked around, its muse raising. There's only me now. With that stupid owl gone, I'm the only one you can rely on in these situations. See, its ego was already too inflated. Yes, you're right. I shifted my attention towards the distant ball of red and squinted my eyes. I needed to figure out a way to handle that thing in the distance. But how exactly could I do that? I needed to figure out the solution quickly, considering that I was still underwater and that I couldn't hold my breath for long. Furthermore, there was also, "You are a very strange human." Exclamation mark question mark quote. Breaking me out of my thoughts was a gentle whisper, filtering through my mind as I felt my body tingle. I hastily looked around, my eyes narrowing as I eventually settled my gaze on Pebble, who looked at me in confusion. "What's wrong?" "No, nothing." The voice was different than Pebble's. It was softer, less overbearing, a lot quieter. "Were you not looking for me?" "I am, right before you." The red orb in the distance pulsed and throbbed, the world shimmering in red as my head flicked in its direction. "Wait, you're a strange human. Your mind is a lot stronger than anyone I've ever encountered before. And not only that, but you've somehow managed to tame a dragon." "Tamed? Who's tamed?" Pebble furiously looked in the direction of the orb, its eyes glaring at it. But it wasn't like the orb was wrong. "What do you see in the human, dragon?" Completely disregarding Pebble's words, the orb pulsed again, its light slowly fading to display a weird-looking brain. The sight made my chest grow heavier. Why would someone from a race so prideful follow a human? "What do you see in him?" The hive monster's voice continued to whisper across the surroundings, the multitude of red dots shimmering with each question it asked. I could only stand in silence, calmly listening to the brain's words. While I already knew this in advance, this monster appears to be at around the Terror to Destroyer rank. Only creatures of such a level had enough conscience to speak. Of course, not all Terror ranks were capable of developing a consciousness. However, quite a few did, and this monster present was capable of communicating. This made things a little bit more complicated. Mainly because the smarter a creature was, the harder it was to beat. I would have much rather have fought against a physically stronger creature than a weaker one with intelligence. Is it possible that the human is holding you hostage and forcing you to work for it? That could be possible, but I don't sense any restrictions in you. Who is forcing whom? Pebble glared at the mind in the distance. I'm here willingly. The human is merely helping me find a new body. Once I do, I'll be free. So he's helping you? Yes. But how can you trust a human? The creature appeared to be asking strangely specific questions. What was it trying to achieve? I've been with the human long enough to know. And I'm also not the only one who did. There was another stupid guy before. That owl, it used to be a spirit too, but now it's back into its own body after reaching the destroyer rank that the human helped it achieve. Oh, the human helped it achieve such a thing. I could now feel the keen interest from the creature as the red dots around shimmered with curiosity, almost as if thousands upon thousands of eyes were looking at me at once. It made my body shiver. Yes, the human did it. I was able to witness everything. Really, now, I suddenly started to have a bad feeling as I hastily turned my head in Pebble's direction, but by the time I did, it was already too late as the red dots around me shone with a brilliant red light and thousands upon thousands of red lines connected with Pebble. It all happened so fast that by the time I reacted, it was already over as Pebble's entire body froze on the spot. Shit, I cursed while moving towards Pebble. However, right as I moved, the dots connecting to Pebble faded, as though nothing had happened. I see. How interesting. The dragon doesn't seem to be lying. I slowly turned my head to look at the mind as I felt it pulse slightly, almost as though it was smiling at me. To be able to do something like that and earn the trust of two wild creatures like that, perhaps it might be possible to ask you. Ask me. Ask me for what? Help, of course. I stopped, blinking my eyes. You want my help? Yes, I would like your help. My thoughts paused there. This request caught me off guard. I had originally been prepared to do whatever it took to fight the monster and gain control of it, but things took a completely different direction than I had originally expected. But at the same time, this was a welcome change. I had originally been worried about how to deal with the two lords. Although I was strong, I was nowhere near strong enough to deal with them. Things, however, were different if I had the help of this weird mind-like monster. If I somehow worked with it, then, tell me exactly what you need help with. If it's something that I can do, I'll try my best to help. 6:30. Are you sure you want to help me, human? You have yet to hear what I need your help for. Obviously, if it's something ridiculous, I will refuse. It all depends on what sort of situation you're trying to pull me in. Then what? What will you do after you reject me? That will depend on what your actions are going to be. The world turned silent a moment after. All I could do was stand still while waiting for the monster to answer. I didn't exactly mince my words. I couldn't trust the monster. I understood that the only reason it had even thought about talking to me was because of Pebble's sudden appearance. I was confident it wouldn't have spoken a single word to me had it not been for Pebble. For a dragon of all things to be following a human and willingly become a spirit. It certainly aroused its interest. In some way, Pebble was the reason that this was possible. But even so, I wasn't just going to mindlessly accept the terms of a monster. I needed to benefit from this exchange. If I were simply going to be exploited and potentially backstabbed later, then I'd have no choice but to fight the monster. Had it been any other type of monster, I would have been worried. But this was a mind-type monster, and my specialty was the mind. I wasn't scared of fighting it. My only issue was my breath. I only had about 10 minutes left. All right. Eventually, the monster spoke. I'll make sure to compensate you accordingly. The task should also be within your abilities. I smiled upon hearing the monster's words. I like the sound of that. This was all that I needed to hear. So long as the task was manageable and I received appropriate compensation as a result, I was completely fine with helping the monster. So, what can I do to help you? Let me hear you out first before deciding. Yes. The monster paused for a brief moment, supposedly summarizing the situation in its mind before speaking, its quiet, whisper-like voice. Somber. The great primordial one is being stirred. Oh, didn't that sound familiar? Stirring such a creature will only lead to the utter devastation of the ecosystem. Not only the surface one, but the deep one too. I, alone am not capable of resisting the Great One's wrath. So you need my help preventing the Great One from being stirred. That is correct. So that means you're aware of what is going on. And who is the one responsible for all of this? That is correct. And you've done nothing about it. I've tried, but I was incapable of defeating them. They are numerous and very strong. I frowned at this part. If it really tried and failed, what made it think that I could help it? This situation felt a lot more complicated than originally anticipated. But it wasn't like I could reject helping it. This situation, it directly lined up with my own interest. I, too, wanted to stop whatever was causing the red tide and stirring the Great One. It was in my best interest to do so. I understand your concerns, human. But you mustn't worry. The only reason why I am incapable of defeating the humans is that I lack a good host. One that perfectly suits my needs. I suddenly started to have an extremely bad feeling about the situation. It couldn't be that it wanted to use me as a host. That's when you showed up, and I was able to see just how powerful your mind was. If you were to become my host, then I would have less trouble defeating the ones responsible for all of this. Do not worry, human. You will have full autonomy over your body if you become my host. In fact, it should be, that should be worried. Why exactly? Because in order for you to become my host, I must reveal my true body. Ah, I suddenly started to understand. If it was really as I thought, then the one in the advantageous position was me. If the mind had to expose its real body in order to use me as a host, if it tried something, I could always have either Pebble or Anaz do something to it and kill it on the spot. There was, of course, a lot of danger involved in this situation since the mind could very well foresee everything in advance and somehow stop Pebble and Anaz from attacking its main body. The risks were all too clear. As if capable of reading my mind, the mind asked, "Are you worried that I might try to take over your body without your consent?" In truth, yes. I didn't bother hiding my thoughts and just nodded my head in agreement. I was indeed worried about it potentially taking over my body. How could I not be worried? This monster had been trying to kill me just moments prior. In that case, you don't have to worry too much. Your mind is simply too powerful for me to completely take over. Even if I wanted to, I'm afraid it is impossible for me to do so. The only one that truly bears a risk in this operation is me. And you'd expect me to believe your words like that. It's not about believing or not. I know that you yourself are already aware of just how powerful your mind is. The monster was sharper than expected. Indeed, I was already aware of the fact that my mind was stronger. This was also the reason why I was confident in battling it through the mind space. But just because my mind was stronger, it didn't mean that I could trust it. What if it had some sort of trump card? We do not have much time, human. What will your decision be? I paused, thinking about all the pros and cons of the situation. In the end, there was only one answer. The obvious one. I saw no reason to reject the offer. At the end of the day, not only would I gain an appropriate reward, but the monster's interests were aligned with mine. Using its powers to help me defeat opponents that were beyond what I was currently capable of handling, I was also making my life a lot easier. The only downside was the potential risk involving the situation, but there was a greater risk in operating without the monster's aid. As such, I didn't hesitate any longer. I'll agree to help you. You've made the right decision, human. The distant orb fluctuated wildly, the red dots around it similarly pulsing as the world started to pulse in a powerful red hue. I looked around me before eventually closing my eyes and feeling something latch onto the back of my head. What's going on? What happened? Why is he like that? Anaz looked at the merchant with a worried expression. Ever since he had put on the coral, he had suddenly stopped moving and closed his eyes. It was as if he had suddenly become a statue. If not for the fact that he could still sense a heartbeat, Anaz would have thought he had died. But why was he like this? Anaz looked around him, his gaze falling on the statues that eyed the two of them. His chest tightened as he felt the statues' gazes. He knew that they were being watched. What should I do? At this rate, things will get bad for both of us. Despite his panic, Anaz was able to remain outwardly calm as he tried to figure out the situation. He first looked at the merchant's body to see if there were any abnormalities. However, looking at him, there didn't seem to be anything wrong. Then, why was he suddenly frozen like that? Could he be allergic to the corals, or could it be? A thought struck Anaz's mind as his eyes started to widen. Could it be that the monster was trying to take control of the merchant's body? If it's true, then things might be even worse than I originally expected. Anaz started to chew on his lips, keeping his breath in check. He could last for about an hour with his breath held. This came as a result of his specialization in the body path. His training granted him an exceptionally strong body and lungs. But that was besides the point. His body grew alert as his eyes sharpened. Looking around, he moved nearer to Lazarus while his body tensed. So far, he could still feel Lazarus's weird gravity skill pulling him down. He had yet to lose the battle. I'll protect him in the meantime. This was so that he could ensure he wouldn't be interrupted by some random monster. If he was interrupted, then who knew what was going to happen? But then again, if that was what the monster wanted, it'd have used the statues already. Could it be that it wants to retain the body in perfect shape or? Feeling something stir, Anaz's head flicked directly towards Lazarus as something sprouted from beneath the seabed, stabbing right at the back of his neck. Shit, Anaz grew alarmed, but he wasn't able to react in time as whatever it was that shot towards him latched onto his neck. Anaz felt his entire body tense. And then, Lazarus slowly opened his eyes, his gaze calm and expression colder than usual. For a moment, he felt completely different from the merchant he had grown familiar with. But that wasn't for long, as the all-too-familiar smile marred his features and he slid his finger across the water. The next scene left Anaz completely shaken as he watched the statues around them stir, all moving at the same time and walking towards them. Oh, shit, the muscles on Anaz's body squeezed and tensed as he clenched his fists tightly, ready to fight. However, just before he could even get started, the merchant raised his hand. And statues stopped. Anaz blinked slowly, trying his best to process the situation. Then, slowly turning his head towards the merchant, he saw him smiling directly at him. That was when he saw his mouth move. Pretty cool, right?